They told her to step away from the plane, that she didn't belong there, that someone important was about to board. What they didn't know was she built the plane, owned the company, and signed their paychecks. And within minutes, a federal convoy rolled onto the runway because Dr. Vanessa Cole had just activated a national defense emergency code. This isn't just a story about racism or arrogance. It's a story about what happens when quiet dignity meets undeniable power, and justice answers back. Hi, I'm honored to welcome you to today's story. If you're someone who believes in standing up for what's right, no matter your age, I hope you'll like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel for more powerful true stories. And don't forget to tap the bell icon so you never miss the next one. Now get comfortable. Let me take you back to where it all began. She had just signed a $1.2 billion contract with the U.S. Department of Defense, but on that rainy afternoon in Dallas, none of it seemed to matter. Dr. Vanessa Cole stepped out of the sleek black town car onto the tarmac at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The wind tugged at her coat as the scent of jet fuel mingled with the soft patter of oncoming rain. At 52, she carried herself with quiet elegance, an air of wisdom and resolve only earned through decades of battles no one saw. To the world, she was a decorated aerospace scientist, a visionary entrepreneur, and the founder of Cole Aerospace, the firm behind America's most advanced military aircraft. But in this moment, she was simply a tired woman returning home after making history. Hours earlier, Vanessa had stood beneath the spotlight in Berlin, shaking hands with world leaders and Pentagon generals alike. Her company had just secured the largest defense contract and awarded to a civilian firm in over a decade, $1.2 billion to build a new line of stealth-capable electric jets for the U.S. military. The ink was barely dry. Her name was on every major news site. But Vanessa never cared much for fanfare. She preferred the silence of integrity and the satisfaction of meaningful work. Her ride, a custom Gulfstream G800, gleamed on the far end of the runway, a symbol not just of wealth, but of innovation and ownership. The plane was powered by the very propulsion system she had helped invent, a marvel of engineering born from sleepless nights and sacrifice. Still, as she approached the executive terminal, something in the air shifted. She wasn't dressed like a celebrity, nor did she flaunt her success. Her tailored gray coat and sensible heels were understated. There were no bodyguards, no entourage, only her. And in a world conditioned to judge worth by appearance, that was often the most dangerous form of invisibility. Vanessa had no idea that before she could take off, she would first have to confront something far heavier than any contract: the deeply rooted prejudice of people who didn't know who they were talking to and didn't care to find out. What happened next would not only shake the walls of her company, it would ripple through the nation. Vanessa's heels clicked softly on the polished floor as she entered the executive terminal, her leather carry-on gliding silently behind her. The air inside was cool, filtered, and heavy with a manufactured calm that only money could buy. Framed photographs of CEOs, senators, and retired generals lined the mahogany-paneled walls like silent gatekeepers. She had walked this hall before, plenty of times, but today something felt different. As she neared the private lounge entrance, a man stepped forward abruptly from behind the concierge desk. He was tall, lean, and wore a badge that read Trent Holloway, lounge director. He eyed her from head to toe with a smile that never touched his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm, almost theatrical, "this lounge is restricted to qualifying VIP clients only." Vanessa offered a polite smile. "I know," she replied evenly, reaching into her coat pocket. "I believe I do qualify." She handed him her boarding documents and her Cole Aerospace-issued Platinum Access card, embossed with her initials and the private tail number of her aircraft. Trent took the card but didn't glance at it right away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as though trying to make sense of what he was looking at. Then, with deliberate slowness, he raised the card to the overhead light, flipping it back and forth as though it might reveal a hidden watermark. He frowned. "This looks different," he said, suspicion creeping into his voice. "We've seen a lot of fakes lately. These custom cards. You know how easy they are to make online these days." Vanessa's smile faded slightly. "That card wasn't made online. You'll find it's directly linked to my aircraft. Perhaps you can scan the QR code on the back." Trent didn't move. Instead, he leaned forward and lowered his voice just enough to inject a bite of condescension. "I'm going to need you to wait right here while I verify with the operations," he said. Then he glanced toward the glass door behind her and added, "Outside." Vanessa hesitated. "It's raining." He nodded, unmoved. "Yes, it is." Before she could respond, he lifted his hand and waved over a nearby security guard, motioning toward her with 2 fingers. Discreet, but unmistakable. The guard stepped closer. It was subtle, practiced, and precise, like a performance he'd delivered before. Vanessa wasn't being physically removed. Not yet, but the message was clear. You don't belong here. She gathered her things slowly, her movements graceful, controlled. The silence between them was louder than any insult. As she stepped back toward the sliding doors, the security guard held it open with a neutral face, but even his posture suggested vigilance, not service. Vanessa walked out into the soft drizzle, the scent of damp pavement rising around her. She wasn't humiliated, not yet, but the sting was real. And as she stood alone under a gray Texas sky, rain beginning to soak through her coat, a single thought settled in her mind like steel. They still don't know who I am, and they have no idea what's coming. The automatic doors hissed shut behind her, and with them, the illusion of civility vanished. Outside, the light Texas rain had thickened into a steady downpour, soaking the concrete and streaking the wide terminal windows like tears. Vanessa stood beneath the edge of the overhang for a moment, hoping the storm would pass quickly. It didn't. She pulled her coat tighter, but the wind cut through the wool like it wasn't there. The once crisp collar now clung to her neck, and water began to darken the fabric in uneven patches. Her sleek ponytail, carefully styled before her morning flight from Berlin, drooped against her cheek. Vanessa had stood before presidents. She had dined with 4-star generals, testified before Congress, and negotiated with heads of state. But here, outside the executive lounge of a Texas airport, her airport, she was nothing more than a silhouette in the rain. Forgotten, ignored, dismissed. She glanced back through the glass, watching as a white couple, clearly not executives by any professional standard, approached the same desk where she had been turned away. Trent greeted them with a warm smile and a nod. No ID requested, no inspection of cards, no suspicion. The doors opened for them like magic. Vanessa's jaw clenched, but she didn't move. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She knew this brand of exclusion well, the kind that wrapped itself in policy, procedure, and just doing my job. It didn't scream, it whispered, it smiled, it denied without ever raising its voice. And yet, not everyone inside was blind. Roughly 50 yards away, behind a row of parked shuttle carts, an older man stood watching. Clarence Banks, 75, wore a faded jacket embroidered with the emblem of the United States Marine Corps and a pair of thick glasses that had seen war and worse. He'd worked part-time at the airport for 6 years, managing the VIP vehicle lane. Most travelers never noticed him. But Clarence noticed everything. He saw Vanessa walk in earlier, saw her posture, shoulders back, spine straight, saw the way she handled herself, measured and proud. And now he watched as she stood in the rain, quietly with dignity, even as the water soaked her down to her skin. Something didn't sit right. Clarence reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old Motorola body camera. He hadn't used it in months, just kept it around for safety, as he liked to say. But something about this moment felt important. He tapped it on, the red light blinking as it began to record. He zoomed in slightly, capturing the raindrops sliding off Vanessa's cheekbones, the distant figures inside the terminal who never looked her way, and the pair of security officers standing just out of frame pretending not to notice her. The lens didn't blink. It didn't carry bias. It simply recorded. Clarence narrowed his eyes. Vanessa Cole. He remembered that name now. 4 years ago, he had watched a Defense Department ceremony on C-SPAN, one of those quiet, untelevised affairs in Washington where medals are handed to civilians who've changed the course of national defense. There she was, Dr. Vanessa Cole, introduced as the mind behind the propulsion system that saved 3 F-22 pilots in a mechanical failure over the Pacific. She had stood at the podium, calm, confident, composed. Clarence didn't forget faces, and he sure as hell didn't forget heroes. Back under the overhang, Vanessa turned her gaze toward the horizon. Her jet, the G800 she helped design from the inside out, sat gleaming in the distance, bathed in white mist and runway light. It was a cruel irony. She could see it. She just couldn't get to it. She looked down at her platinum card, still clutched in her hand, water pooling in its creases. The ink hadn't run. The proof of who she was hadn't changed. Only the people reading it had. The wind picked up. Her coat flapped against her legs. Behind the glass, Trent never glanced her way. Clarence adjusted the zoom, steadying his hands. There were stories people wouldn't believe unless you showed them. And this needed to be seen. Vanessa shifted slightly, the water now dripping from her sleeves. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes, those eyes told another story. Not of defeat, not even of anger, but of patience, like someone waiting for something she knew was inevitable. Clarence whispered to himself, barely audible over the rain. They have no idea who she is, and he kept filming. The rain had begun to ease, falling now in softer rhythms, but Vanessa Cole was already soaked. Still she walked forward, head held high, toward the gleaming silhouette of her Gulfstream G800, parked at the far end of the executive tarmac. It waited for her like an old friend, patient, unbothered by the storm. A jet designed by her mind, paid for by her own hands, and registered in her name. Yet every step closer felt like a march into deeper resistance. A female figure emerged from beneath the wing stairs, clipboard in hand and authority in her stride. She wore a crisp navy blazer with gold stripes on the cuffs, uniform issue for Cole Aerospace's elite flight crew. She was tall, poised, and entirely unmoved by the sight of the rain-soaked woman approaching. Brooke Manning, Chief In-Flight Service Officer for Cole Aerospace's VIP jet operations. 44, polished, proud, and deeply convinced she knew exactly what kind of people belonged aboard jets like this. And Vanessa, in Brooke's mind, clearly wasn't one of them. Brooke raised her chin as Vanessa approached. Her lips were curled into something between a smirk and a warning. Without so much as a greeting, she stepped directly in Vanessa's path. "This aircraft is reserved for private use," she said coldly. "You'll need to check with the commercial terminal. It's about a mile in the other direction." Vanessa blinked, rain still dripping from her eyelashes. "I know exactly where I am," she replied calmly. "And this is my flight." Brooke didn't budge. "I don't think so." Vanessa reached into her clutch and calmly retrieved her documents, boarding pass, ID, and her aerospace-issued flight badge, and extended them toward Brooke with an outstretched hand. But Brooke didn't take them. She looked at the documents, then at Vanessa, and scoffed, actually scoffed. Her eyes scanned Vanessa's damp coat, her windswept hair, the subtle yet undeniable elegance of someone powerful who didn't need to scream it. That only irritated Brooke more. "You've got to be kidding," she muttered, voice now rising. Then, in a motion that made time stand still, she slapped Vanessa's papers from her hand, sending them fluttering onto the wet tarmac. They landed with a soft splash beside the front wheel of the jet Vanessa had designed. Brooke's voice sharpened, now deliberately loud enough for ground crew nearby to hear. "I'm calling security," she snapped. "We have someone trying to gain unauthorized access to a government-contracted aircraft." Vanessa didn't move. She looked down at her papers, soaked and streaked with runway grime. The plastic edge of her boarding pass glistened in the rain like a discarded receipt. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to strip her dignity. But this was willful, calculated, public. Behind Brooke, a few flight techs and ramp agents turned their heads at the commotion. Most quickly looked away. One or two lingered, unsure whether to step in or stay out of it. No one spoke. Vanessa bent down slowly, collected her papers, and stood again, taller this time. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't scream or demand recognition. She simply looked Brooke in the eye and said, "I'm giving you one last opportunity to do the right thing." Brooke raised her brows in mock surprise, then turned to speak into her shoulder radio. "Code yellow on hangar 3, repeat. Code yellow, we've got a non-compliant individual attempting unauthorized boarding. I need backup now." From the terminal, 2 security guards began jogging across the tarmac. One had a baton clipped to his belt. Vanessa exhaled slowly, the fog of her breath mingling with the cold mist around her. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was disdain wrapped in authority. A woman so convinced she could spot a fraud, she couldn't imagine truth standing quietly in front of her. Just behind the fence line, Clarence Banks had followed the scene from a distance. He had recorded every second, his camera still trained on Brooke's face. His veteran instinct told him this wasn't just workplace arrogance, it was something uglier. As the guards neared, Vanessa held her ground. She didn't run, she didn't plead. She simply opened her clutch again, pulled out her phone, and dialed a number labeled Ethan. Direct. Brooke rolled her eyes. "Oh, now she's calling her lawyer," she said mockingly, turning toward the guards. "Let's wrap this up before it turns into a lawsuit stunt." But the moment Vanessa spoke into the receiver, everything shifted. "Activate Ares 11 protocol. I'm on the ground at DFW. There's been an escalation." Brooke blinked. "Wait, what did you just say?" Vanessa's eyes didn't leave hers. "You heard me." Brooke's mouth opened slightly, but before she could say a word, the line of SUVs in the distance, black, glossy, and unmistakably federal, lit up their sirens and rolled onto the tarmac. And suddenly, Brooke's certainty began to crack. The first distant wail of sirens was barely audible over the pounding in Brooke Manning's ears. For a moment, she froze, staring at Vanessa as if trying to make sense of a puzzle she thought she had already solved. Vanessa didn't flinch. She simply lowered her phone, her thumb still hovering over the active call. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between resolute calm and something deeper, unshakable purpose. Brooke's confidence faltered, but it didn't die. Not yet. From behind, Trent Holloway arrived in a half-jog, rainwater streaking down his badge. He looked between Vanessa and Brooke with concern, but his words were sharp. "What's going on here?" Brooke answered without hesitation. She refused to leave. "I called security. She's making threats now, talking about some federal protocol." "She what?" Trent narrowed his eyes at Vanessa. "You need to leave the restricted area immediately. This is your last warning." Vanessa met his gaze without blinking. "I'm not going anywhere." Trent sneered, then, perhaps sensing this moment might require documentation, pulled out his phone and hit record. Brooke followed suit. "Let's make sure corporate sees how we handled this," she said under her breath, lifting her own phone camera toward Vanessa. "We're following procedure." Vanessa stood perfectly still, the wind tousling strands of wet hair across her cheek. Her coat clung to her, soaked through, but she looked every bit like a woman carved from steel. Two security officers approached, visibly tense. One of them, a younger man named Officer Daniels, placed a hand on the baton at his hip. His other hand hovered over his holster, not quite drawn, but not at ease either. "All right, ma'am," Daniels said, voice clipped. "You've been warned. We need you to step back now or we'll have to move you by force." From the corner of the tarmac, Clarence Banks stopped breathing for a moment. He had seen this before, too many times. A moment of escalation, a woman of color confronted not with questions, but commands, not with conversation, but control. His grip tightened around the silver medallion tucked beneath his jacket, the Distinguished Service Cross awarded to him after Fallujah. On the back, just beneath the engraving of his name, was a discreetly embedded GPS beacon, an old gift from a Pentagon friend, an emergency link to federal systems. Rare, old school, but still functional. Clarence's thumb slid over the ridged edge of the coin. He closed his eyes, muttered under his breath, and pressed down. The click was soft, almost silent, but somewhere deep within the federal command system, it triggered a Level 2 security alert under the name Banks, Clarence J., USMC Red and Red. His location blinked to life on a screen at Homeland Security. Clarence exhaled and muttered to himself, "Come on, old girl, do your thing." Back on the tarmac, Officer Daniels took a step closer. The baton at his hip was now fully in hand, glinting under the floodlights. His partner moved to flank Vanessa from the right. "You have 10 seconds, he said. "Comply or we restrain you." The words fell heavy in the air. Vanessa didn't move. Her hands stayed visible, arms relaxed at her sides. But her eyes, those fierce, unblinking eyes, shifted toward Brooke and Trent, who were now actively filming. "Be careful," she said, her voice low but powerful. "You're documenting your own downfall." Brooke laughed bitterly. "Lady, you're going to be escorted off this tarmac in handcuffs. There's no downfall happening here." But her laugh was brittle, because just then the sirens grew louder. From the perimeter gate came a convoy of 3 black SUVs, headlights cutting through the mist like blades. They didn't roll in slowly. They barreled forward with urgency and purpose, pulling onto the tarmac like something out of a federal sting operation. Officer Daniels turned, startled. He quickly stepped back from Vanessa and raised one arm in a nervous salute toward the incoming vehicles. Trent lowered his phone slightly. What the hell is that? Brooke stared, the color draining from her face. Is that Homeland? Vanessa didn't answer. She simply stood taller. The SUVs braked in a tight formation, tires screeching slightly on the wet surface. Doors opened in unison, and federal security officers clad in black and bearing official seals stepped out with practiced precision. From the middle vehicle, a man in a dark coat and a familiar stride emerged. Ethan Cole, Chief Operating Officer of Cole Aerospace, Vanessa's younger brother, and one of the most powerful civilian defense contractors in the country. He didn't shout, he didn't run, he just walked straight toward his sister. And in that moment, Brooke Manning's phone slipped from her hand and hit the pavement with a sickening splash. Vanessa stood motionless as the black SUVs came to a grinding halt, their armored frames hissing steam into the cold, rain-slicked air. For those who didn't know better, it might have looked like a national emergency had just arrived on the tarmac. In truth, it had. Inside the middle vehicle, a Department of Defense liaison barked rapid-fire instructions into his headset while a high-ranking Cole Aerospace security chief scanned the scene ahead. Standing behind the jet, partially obscured by a fuel truck, was a woman they had all read about in briefings, security files, and national strategy documents. Dr. Vanessa Cole, founder and CEO of Cole Aerospace, one of the most valuable defense contractors in the country. She had triggered Ares 11. There were only 3 known civilians authorized to activate that code. It had never been used in public before, but its meaning was clear. A national defense contractor faced an immediate threat to personal safety and operational control. And so, within 7 minutes, a rapid response team had mobilized with vehicles, federal oversight, and internal executive personnel. Ethan Cole stepped out first. His face was calm, but his eyes were storms. The world knew him as a tech mogul and COO. But right now, he moved like a soldier, precise, alert, and cold with fury. He wore a dark trench coat over a charcoal suit, his military pins still affixed to the lapel. Rain glistened on his shoulders as he marched across the tarmac, flanked by Cole Aerospace legal counsel, 2 federal agents, and the head of the firm's internal security division. As he approached the gathering storm, Trent still filming, Brooke now visibly shaken, the security guards lowering their batons, Ethan didn't speak. He didn't have to. Vanessa lifted her eyes to meet his, and in a brief, wordless glance, they exchanged everything. Recognition, solidarity, and the unspoken promise that no injustice committed here would go unanswered. The moment Ethan stopped in front of her, he turned to Brooke, then Trent, and finally to the security guards. He didn't raise his voice. His tone didn't waver, but it cut like a blade. What happened here? Nobody responded. Trent lowered his phone slightly, stammering for words. Brooke swallowed hard and tried to speak, but her voice came out too quiet to hear. I'll ask once, Ethan continued, his jaw clenched. Why was the CEO of this company blocked from boarding her own jet? Why was she harassed, threatened, filmed without consent, denied entry by her own employees? He turned toward Officer Daniels, whose baton was still partially extended, and asked sharply, "Were you briefed on this passenger before responding?" Daniels froze. "Sir, we were told." "You were told wrong," Ethan snapped. "That woman is Vanessa Cole. You were about to lay hands on a federally secured defense contractor in the middle of a private aerospace operation. Do you have any idea what that means legally?" The second guard took a nervous step back. Across the tarmac, Clarence Banks stood quietly by the shuttle station, his camera still recording. A knowing look passed across his weathered face as he whispered to no one in particular, "That's right. Say it loud. Let him hear it." Vanessa remained silent, giving Ethan the space to do what he did best, disassemble arrogance with surgical precision. Ethan turned to Brooke. "You are the chief of in-flight service. You went through our leadership inclusion training. You know who signs your checks. So tell me, why?" Brooke's voice finally cracked. I didn't recognize her. She didn't look like... Like what? Ethan interrupted. Tom detayayin ibihanan. His tone darkened. Like a CEO or like a person you'd serve without question if she looked a little more like you. Her mouth opened. No words came. Trent stepped forward, trying to salvage his ego. I was just following protocol. She refused to step out of the lounge when asked. We didn't want to risk a breach. Ethan narrowed his eyes. She owns the lounge, Trent. She funded its construction. She has higher security clearance than you'll ever even see. And you dragged her through the rain like some trespasser. His voice lowered, tighter now. That is not protocol. That's personal. Brooke's shoulders slumped. Her phone slipped from her hand again, bouncing once against the pavement. And then Ethan turned to Vanessa, not as her brother, but as her second in command. Dr. Cole, he said with solemn deference, we are fully at your disposal. This team is here under the authority of Ares 11. What would you like us to do? Vanessa stepped forward, finally breaking her silence. Her voice was cool, deliberate, and laced with something far more powerful than anger. Command. I want every second of security footage pulled. I want body cams, internal feeds, personal recordings, everything. I want names logged, actions documented, and I want them preserved for an internal tribunal under the Federal Contractor Ethics Act. She turned to Brooke and Trent, her gaze unblinking. After that, I want them both off my runway. The silence was deafening. Only the slow patter of the rain remained, gentler now, almost reverent. No one moved, no one protested. And as the federal agents began moving into formation behind her, Vanessa stood on the tarmac she had paid for, facing the very people who had tried to erase her power with condescension and control. Now they would watch it return in full. For a long breath, the tarmac remained still. The federal agents flanked Vanessa like a living wall. Brooke and Trent stood speechless, shadows of their former arrogance clinging to them like the rain-soaked uniforms they wore. Security officers had lowered their gazes, avoiding eye contact altogether. No one moved, no one dared. And then, from the edge of the scene, a voice low and graveled with time cut through the silence. She's the reason I'm alive today. Heads turned. Clarence Banks stepped out from beneath the awning of the shuttle station. The wind tugged at his worn veteran's jacket, the embroidered eagle of the United States Marine Corps glinting wet under the runway lights. He walked slowly but firmly across the tarmac, his cane forgotten behind him, boots splashing through shallow puddles with quiet defiance. He came to a stop just a few feet from Vanessa. For a moment, their eyes met, not as strangers, but as Americans bound by sacrifice and service. He gave her a soft, respectful nod. Then Clarence turned to the crowd, agents, airport staff, flight crews, and the few passengers who had begun to gather behind the barricade. Many held phones now, recording, uncertain of what they were witnessing, but sensing it meant something. Clarence reached into his coat and slowly drew out a silver medal, glimmering even beneath the gray sky. He held it high, turning it slowly for everyone to see. The Silver Star, he announced, awarded for actions in Fallujah, Iraq, 2004. I earned this on the same day I should have died. The crowd remained silent. Clarence's voice didn't rise, but it resonated like thunder. I was in a CH-47 Chinook helicopter that got caught in a mechanical tailspin over hostile ground. We lost control. Radar was jammed. Communications failed. We were blind. We were done. He paused, then looked back at Vanessa, his expression softening. But the only reason our coordinates were corrected and an Air Force intercept found us in time was because this woman, Dr. Vanessa Cole, had personally led the design of the radar signal override system that saved us. Brooke's mouth dropped open. Trent's camera hand began to tremble. Clarence turned back to them and took a step forward. She's not just a CEO. She's a patriot. She's a scientist. She's a woman who gave this country a tool that saved my entire squad. And here y'all are, treating her like she doesn't belong on the very plane she built? His voice cracked with restrained fury. Shame on every one of you. No one moved. No one interrupted. The only sound was the soft ping of phones going live. Because Clarence's voice had unleashed a tidal wave. Behind the fences, a young woman in a yellow hoodie was already live streaming. She whispered into her phone, "There's a veteran speaking. This is bigger than we thought." A few feet away, a pilot from another airline leaned over and hit record on his phone. A mechanic dropped his wrench, stunned, and captured it too. Within 5 minutes, the first clip hit Twitter. A former Marine, badge in hand, defending a black woman who was just moments earlier nearly arrested on her own tarmac. By minute 6, the video had over 12,000 views. By minute 9, the hashtag LetHerBoard had started trending. The footage was raw. Rain distorted the audio. The lighting was terrible. But truth doesn't need polish. It just needs witnesses. And this time, the witnesses were everywhere. Clarence turned to Vanessa once more, offering her his medal with shaking fingers. "I don't need to carry this anymore," he said. "You earned it long before I did." Vanessa's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. "Not here. Not yet." She closed his hand gently around the medal and whispered, "Keep it. You're the reason I'm standing taller today." Behind them, Ethan's phone buzzed. He checked it. Twitter was exploding. Defense officials were pinging him for context. Journalists were calling in. The storm had gone national. He looked at Vanessa, then said just loud enough for those closest to hear, "There's no walking this back now. They turned this into a moment. You just turned it into a movement." Vanessa nodded, her voice steady as she faced Brooke and Trent. "You thought no one would notice," she said, "but the world just did." At that moment, for the first time since this began, Brooke's facade broke completely. Her lips trembled. Her eyes flooded with something that looked like regret, but came too late. Trent turned away, trying to shut off his phone, but another camera had already caught the gesture. Because now it was too late to hide. Vanessa didn't need to shout. She didn't need revenge. She had something far more powerful. She had the truth, and the whole world watching. Within 15 minutes, the cabin of Vanessa Cole's private Gulfstream G800 transformed into a makeshift boardroom. Plush leather seats surrounded a polished mahogany conference table that gleamed beneath soft, recessed lighting. But no one sitting inside felt comfortable. The jet had not yet taken off, but the stakes had already ascended to 30,000 feet. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, composed but unreadable. To her left was Ethan, COO, and her brother, in both blood and battle. On her right sat Cole Aerospace's lead counsel, 2 representatives from Human Resources, and the head of Internal Security. Across from them, drenched in silence and dread, sat Trent Holloway and Brooke Manning. Also present, by request, was Clarence Banks, invited as a witness. Though he didn't speak, his presence alone carried the weight of valor and moral authority. A quiet reminder of who had truly stood for what was right. Vanessa spoke first, her tone calm but devoid of softness. "This isn't a formality. This isn't optics. This is accountability." Trent shifted in his seat. Brooke looked down at her hands. "I'm not interested in excuses. I'm not here for apologies rehearsed in a mirror. You're here because you used your positions of trust and authority to humiliate, endanger, and obstruct a person you never even bothered to properly identify. And that person just happens to be me." She paused. "The CEO, the woman who signed your hiring letters, the woman whose name is on the side of this aircraft." She turned to her legal counsel. "Let the record reflect that both Mr. Holloway and Ms. Manning have been presented with the employee conduct guidelines they acknowledged during onboarding and again during quarterly reviews." A thick binder was slid across the table toward them. Pages tabbed, highlighted, waiting. "Page 43, the HR rep said flatly. "Section 4, discrimination, profiling, and ethical behavior." Vanessa tapped the table. "Read it out loud, both of you." Brooke glanced at Trent, then reluctantly began. "All employees are expected to treat guests, clients, and colleagues without prejudice or personal bias, regardless of race, gender, background, or perceived status." Her voice faltered, then faded. Trent picked up next. "Any failure to recognize or verify client credentials based on appearance alone constitutes grounds for disciplinary action up to and including termination." Vanessa folded her hands, watching them both. "Now tell me," she said, her voice still level, "at what point during our exchange did either of you stop and check who I actually was?" Trent swallowed hard. I was following protocol. We've had some security incidents lately, and I was just being cautious. It's part of our high-level clearance process." Vanessa didn't raise her voice. She simply leaned forward a little. "No, Mr. Holloway, that wasn't protocol. That was presumption. You didn't verify, you assumed, and then you dismissed, filmed, and escalated. That isn't security, that's bias, dressed up in a company badge. Trent's cheeks burned red. She turned to Brooke. And you, Ms. Manning? You physically slapped my documents from my hand and called security. You ignored my identity, denied my right to board a plane I own, and accused me of criminal intent. Do you have anything to say that doesn't begin with blame? Brooke straightened, face pale but voice steady. I've been tricked before, okay? A few years back, I had someone fake access to a private jet. Almost cost us a lawsuit. Since then, I've been overly careful. I didn't mean to disrespect you personally. I didn't want to be fooled again. Vanessa blinked slowly. So you've been lied to before, and now everyone who doesn't look like your definition of a VIP is automatically suspicious? Brooke shifted uncomfortably. I didn't say that. You didn't have to, Vanessa replied. You demonstrated it, clearly and publicly. And now it's on video across every major social platform in the country. The HR director interjected gently. We've begun compiling public footage and internal recordings. So far, none of it supports Ms. Manning or Mr. Holloway's version of events. Ethan added, we're also receiving requests from the Pentagon and 2 oversight committees. This isn't just about Cole Aerospace anymore. This is about public trust. Vanessa took a slow breath, letting the weight of that sink in. She looked at Brooke and Trent once more. You had a choice. You could have asked questions. You could have checked credentials. You could have shown basic human decency, but you didn't. And that's not just a failure of judgment, it's a failure of character. The room went still again. Vanessa leaned back, hands folded. Before I make my decision, is there anything either of you would like to say, not to save your jobs, but to prove to yourselves that you've learned something from this moment? Trent opened his mouth, closed it again. Brooke blinked, lips parting, but no sound came out. Clarence looked on quietly, the silver star still pinned to his chest. Vanessa nodded. Noted. The silence inside the jet cabin was thick. Not just awkward, but historical. The kind of silence that came right before irreversible change. Vanessa rose from her seat slowly, her presence alone commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Her expression was composed, her voice quiet but razor sharp, every syllable ringing with finality. This is not just about 2 employees, she began, eyes fixed on Brooke and Trent. This is about the culture we tolerated, sometimes silently, sometimes conveniently, for far too long. She looked directly at them, her tone unwavering. Effective immediately, both of you are terminated from Cole Aerospace, not just for violating protocol, but for violating the very ethics this company stands on. You will not return to your posts. Your access credentials have been revoked. Security will escort you from the property upon landing. Trent's jaw fell open, his face flushed with disbelief. Brooke turned pale. Neither said a word. Basum. There was nothing left to say. Vanessa turned toward the 2 security guards who had stood by during the ordeal, one of whom had gripped a baton a little too tightly. As for you 2, until an internal review is completed, you are suspended from duty. We will determine whether your conduct reflected the neutrality expected of contracted law enforcement, or whether your silence was complicity. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The air in the room was heavy enough to press on lungs. Then her gaze softened, just a little, as she turned to the man seated quietly at the far end of the table. Mr. Clarence Banks, she said, her voice warmer, more human. This company owes you a debt we cannot repay. You stood up, not just for me, but for the principles this country was built on. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't seek the spotlight. You did what most people didn't. You acted. Clarence's eyes glistened, though he kept his chin high. Vanessa nodded to Ethan, who opened a leather case and presented a custom-forged civilian Medal of Honor, engraved with the Cole Aerospace seal and Clarence's full name. We'd like to officially honor you with the Cole Aerospace Civil Service Medal, Vanessa said, pausing as she fastened it to the lapel of his worn veteran's jacket. And we would like to invite you to join our newly formed Internal Ethics Advisory Council. Your experience, judgment, and courage are exactly what we need to rebuild the moral spine of this company. Clarence tried to speak but found no words. He simply saluted. The room erupted into quiet, respectful applause, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. Vanessa gave him a long look, one veteran to another. Then she turned back to the full assembly, executives, legal, HR, operations. "It stops here," she said. "Starting today, Cole Aerospace will launch a company-wide initiative called Face the Mirror. It's not a seminar. It's not another training video to check a box. It is a mandatory real-time accountability program where any employee who's found to have committed acts of profiling, harassment, or bias will be required to sit face-to-face with the person they harmed, or if that's not possible, with a qualified stand-in, and listen, without defense, without interruption, just listen." Her voice tightened with conviction. "They will hear how it felt. They will feel the consequences, not just in paperwork, but in person. Because until you feel the discomfort of your own prejudice, you'll never change it." Gasps and murmurs filled the cabin. The HR director took rapid notes. One executive nodded slowly, understanding the depth of what was being proposed. Ethan stood beside his sister now, folding his arms. "We'll also be partnering with an independent oversight board, one that includes community leaders, veterans, and civil rights advisors. All investigations of misconduct will be reviewed externally to ensure true transparency," Vanessa added. "And we're introducing AI-aided communication monitoring, not to spy, but to detect subtle patterns of exclusion, favoritism, and silence. Technology won't fix a broken heart, but it can shine a light on behavior we've been too blind or too polite to name." The room quieted again, this time not with dread, but with clarity. Vanessa glanced down at her tablet. Notifications from social media, news outlets, and congressional aides were already pouring in. The story was spreading like wildfire, but she wasn't chasing headlines, she was building legacy. She looked back up, her final words deliberate. "We don't get to choose the storms that come to our doorstep, but we do get to choose who we become when they hit. Today, we choose to stand tall, not just because it's good for business, not just because the world is watching, but because it's the right thing to do." She turned toward the cockpit. "Captain, we're ready for takeoff." 6 months later, Vanessa Cole stood on a stage beneath a domed glass ceiling in Geneva, Switzerland. The sun poured through the panes in golden streaks, casting soft light across a crowd of dignitaries, CEOs, senators, scholars, and young entrepreneurs from around the world. The World Summit on Business Ethics was in full session, and Vanessa had been asked to close the keynote block, not as an aerospace mogul, but as a symbol of corporate moral courage. She stood at the podium in a navy blue suit, calm, poised, and unmistakably resolute. Behind her, a massive screen displayed just 3 words in simple white font: "Lead with conscience." When Vanessa spoke, the room quieted in reverent stillness. 6 months ago, I was nearly removed from my own aircraft by people I employed because I didn't look like what they expected a CEO to look like. I wasn't wearing the right suit. I wasn't surrounded by bodyguards. I didn't fit the mold. But what shocked me more than their actions was how many people, standing nearby, chose to say nothing. And that silence is where the real damage lives. She paused, letting the truth settle into the hearts of every leader in the room. There is no company worth admiring if its success is built on quiet cruelty, unconscious bias, or unchecked assumptions. But if there is one thing I've learned, it's that people can change. Institutions can evolve if we have the courage to face the mirror. There was no need for applause yet. Vanessa wasn't finished. Back in the States, the changes she initiated had already rippled beyond Cole Aerospace. Her Face the Mirror program had been adopted by over 30 major corporations, from tech giants in Silicon Valley to defense contractors in Virginia. HR policies were being rewritten. Bias training was no longer optional, but deeply personal. But perhaps most surprising of all was the letter Vanessa received just 3 weeks before this speech. It arrived quietly, without ceremony. A simple white envelope, hand-addressed, with no return address. But Vanessa knew the handwriting. Brooke Manning. In the letter, Brooke described the months that followed her dismissal. The shame, the silence, the endless loops of watching herself in that viral video and hating every second of it. But she didn't write to defend herself. She wrote to confess, to own what she had done and what she had learned since. She had entered therapy, joined a local racial literacy group, listened to testimonies from people she once would have looked through like glass, and then she made one last request. If there's still a place in your program for someone like me, not to lead, but to learn, I'd be honored to walk through it. Vanessa read the letter twice. Then she picked up the phone and called her team. Brooke Manning was quietly accepted into the Face the Mirror facilitator track, not to teach others, but to walk beside them, to represent not just guilt, but the possibility of grace. Vanessa shared this with the audience now. When we make accountability more than punishment, when we give it purpose, we open the door to redemption. Brooke didn't ask for a second chance. She earned it by showing the world that regret is only powerful when it leads to reflection and action. The crowd stirred with emotion. Many nodded. Some wiped tears discreetly. Vanessa looked out at the sea of faces and smiled faintly. It's easy to build rockets. It's harder to build trust. But trust is the only thing that can carry a company farther than any aircraft ever could. I don't want Cole Aerospace to be remembered for what we invented. I want it remembered for how we rose when it would have been easier to retreat. And then she closed her remarks with the line that would later be quoted in textbooks, business schools, and across LinkedIn profiles around the world. Power without principle is privilege, but power with purpose, that can change the world. A beat of silence followed, then thunderous applause. People stood, some even saluted. And back in Texas, Clarence Banks sat in his living room, watching it unfold on television. He smiled, rested his hands on his cane, and whispered to himself, "That's what leadership looks like." In the months that followed, Vanessa's story was featured in the Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, and 60 Minutes. Universities studied her model for ethical reform. Veterans groups cited her advocacy for respect in civilian leadership. And young girls, especially those who looked like her, wrote her letters by the hundreds. Not about planes. About courage. Her face never graced a billboard. She didn't license her name to sneakers or stock tickers. But in the halls of companies that once looked the other way, they now had her words framed in their lobbies. You don't fix a culture by covering it up. You fix it by facing the mirror. And in every boardroom where excuses used to echo, now came a different sound. Silence followed by truth. And the quiet determination to build something better. Vanessa Cole's journey reminds us that true leadership is not about titles or power. It's about how we respond when the world tests our dignity. For many of us who've lived through decades of change, we've seen both progress and pain. But what this story teaches us at any age is that dignity isn't granted by appearance, wealth, or position. It's affirmed by action. Whether you're in a boardroom or a small-town diner, how we treat others, especially those we don't expect to belong, reveals more about our values than any resume ever could. Vanessa didn't retaliate with rage. She responded with resolve. She didn't seek revenge. She sought reform. And in doing so, she not only changed a company, she inspired a global movement. For those of us in our golden years, it's a reminder that it's never too late to stand up for what's right or to grow if we've been wrong. Whether you're a veteran like Clarence, a leader like Vanessa, or even someone like Brooke, redemption begins when we look inward and ask the hardest question of all, what if I'm the one who needs to change? If this story moved you, I invite you to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to my channel for more powerful stories that speak to justice, compassion, and courage. And don't forget to tap the bell icon so you won't miss the next chapter. Because around here, we don't just tell stories, we pass down lessons worth remembering. Let's keep the conversation going.